Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the season 2 finale of Mob Psycho 100. A great season finale. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So we immediately pick up in the aftermath of last episode where Mob and Suzuki are having their all-out battle. I'm sure there's other references I could make, but the first thing that came to my mind, it reminded me of the Naruto and Pain fight, especially when Mob threw all those buildings at him. And just that scene in particular definitely gave me Naruto versus Pain vibes. But it's like, obviously it's like the scale gets bigger and bigger with these fights. Because it's like probably up to like the closest scale wise would be like the fight against Mogami in episode 5, because that's the scale. Obviously that was all like mind space type of fight, so like it got crazy, but like real world wise, fight wise, this is just like insane. And the really interesting part is like the more the fight goes on, the more Mob's enjoying it, and he starts getting hyped up, and Suzuki's like, oh, you're just like me, you're enjoying this as well. And like it is seeming like Mob's kind of like getting kind of a little power crazy. And then Ritsu sees him, and he looks at Ritsu, and he sees that look in Ritsu's face, and it scares him, because the thing that's always the catalyst for Mob being the way he is, he never wanted to lose control like that, because he saw what happened with his brother, and he also knows now how his brother feels about him, that it's not just Mob scared of his own powers, he knows how his brother really felt. And even though they're in a better place, that once again, that trauma is still there. And so Mob was beating himself up, because he's like, even if it was just for a moment, I let the power control me. He never wanted that to happen. Once again, let's go back to his fight with Teru. His issue was he couldn't control himself, and he let loose, and he broke down, like was consumed with sadness after everything went down with Teru. So it's really interesting to kind of find Mob back in that situation again. But yeah, like what I was really surprised by was the fact is Mob never went to that question mark mode. Like he did just stay at 100%, and yeah, he pushed his powers out, but it's like he never ever went to that form again, which I'm like, that's so. The closest we got was like a couple episodes ago when he thought his house was burned down and his family was dead, and like that's the last time we saw him kind of cross over. But obviously he was able to kind of Dimple was able to rein him back in, but obviously the fight's getting to the point that it's like, yo, this is like beyond human level scales, to the point like even Teru's like, yo, Mob's using way more power than he even did when he fought me, but dude, it doesn't seem like Mob's winning this. And even, it's kind of like everyone's kind of saying like, Mob, if you need to, like this was like, what was it, Dimple was like, I know you always typically try to do the impossible. This is the one time in your entire life you should not try to do the impossible, Mob. And even Regan's thinking to himself, if you need to run, Mob, do not, he's not afraid for running. Like he did that to Mob in season 1 as well, telling him to run, that it's okay to run. But for Mob, it's like, because he's like trying to say like, this isn't something you have to stake your life on. You don't have to like bet everything on it. But for Mob, this is too important, because he wants to try and save people, kind of like how the people around him in a way like saved him. And it's so interesting too, because like I said, they're duking it out, and like they have this like very like climactic battle of just like they're floating in the sky, and Mob talks about how like he wonders like, when did this happen for Suzuki? It's like, you were basically alone. And he's like, I get that so much. He's like, I think I wish I could forget that forever, the times when I'm alone. But it's like, you talk about you don't need anyone, and then like you've sectioned yourself off. All you have is that solitude, and you've been like that for so long. And it, for Mob, he starts crying, because he legitimately feels bad for Suzuki. But yeah, like even no matter what Mob does, it's not enough, because Suzuki just keeps pulling out more power. And it gets to the point that Mob is like, I don't have enough power to try and put you on a new path. And Suzuki interprets that as like, oh, you finally got me hyped up. I'm releasing some of my power, and you're like, you want to back out now. But my immediate thought was like, no, Mob's saying like, he doesn't have enough power to just let you run rampant and try to find another way, like overpower you and push you into new. It's like, I have enough power to just beat you. That's all I can aim for now. No trying to change you, put you on the new path. Mob puts his everything into the fight until the point that he just like, I mean, hell, like his eyes go red, but like I said, he doesn't fully cross over into that question mark percentage. And he's just like twisting home dude's body. And Suzuki's like, oh, I guess we've both like had such an impact on each other that like it's kind of like a you're so far beyond saving, I can't save you anymore. All I can do is like basically stop you. But the whole situation just pushes him to like release even more of his power, so that turns to a whole colossal thing. And now it's well, I think he starts like short circuiting as so much energy starts eventually coming out of his body the moment Mob starts holding him back even more. And now he's turning into a gigantic bomb. But Mob is like, I got to get out of here because like if I don't, I might not survive this. Everyone else thinks he gets away. So he tells everybody to run for their lives. But then Mob stays behind because for him, it's like, okay, like I'm not going to let you go through this alone. It's like, even if I'm pissed at you and can't necessarily forgive you, you don't deserve to have to go through this alone. Like, once again, people need people, right? And it's like, I can't leave you alone to go through this, because he knows what that's like, being, you know, so abandoned and feeling a certain way about your powers. And I'm obviously like, Shirazawa was kind of a similar victim of that story as well. So it's kind of like because at first I was like, I mean, it's a combination of everything where Mob's probably, it's like, right, I want to try and contain as much of this bomb as I can so it doesn't, I mean, luckily the area's, you know, like empty, but also I want to make sure there's enough like shelter for like my friends to get away from the explosion. But also I don't want to leave you here alone with this, to the point Mob starts absorbing his powers. And he's just like, I could leave you behind, but to me that would be too sad to leave you to go through this alone. And so he's going to do everything he can. Even in this end, he's still trying to help. And then we get a little backstory on Suzuki and Sho's mom. And she was like trying to teach him, is like, okay, like Sho's eventually going to look up to you, so you need to show a good example of him. Like there's a cat. And so she was kind of like the human heart. And I think maybe for a period of time, she probably was able to worm her way into him and make it so that she was kind of his Jiminy Cricket. She was his heart, human heart. She was his consciousness. But then like he just became obsessed with power. He's like, that's all that matters. And she was coming from the perspective kind of similar to Mop, where it's like your psychic powers don't dictate everything. Like you can't use them to just control everything. But he's like, no, I'm going to control the world. He's like, eventually, you know, Sho has already taken interest in my powers, so eventually he'll kind of want to follow my footsteps as well. And to the point, Sho's mom had enough and just left, you know? So that was sad. And then we got the explosion, because I thought for a moment maybe Mob would be able to contain it, but it's like, nope, it goes off like a nuke. And luckily everyone survives, Mob included. And so when he's kind of waking up, I'm like, is this a dream or something? Is this all fake? Because things were kind of a little weird. I thought it was interesting because Risu's like, yo, my wounds have healed. And I was like, I guess like that release of excess power, because I was wondering about that, but I guess it's like that power was such a buildup of that, you know, it's 20 years worth of power built up. And I think it just like that excess energy just erupted everywhere. So everyone, like, because Mob's healed up a little bit, because like everyone was wounded from that, but like Risu's like, no, our clothes are still tethered, but we're good. And we see later on, none of the scars have their scars anymore, because their scars came about because of Suzuki. So I'm wondering, like, when his powers dispersed, like, did it kind of like for it to affect Risu and them the way it did, must mean it like had a healing factor on everybody. So like even the scars are no longer scars. Like none of them have any of the wounds that he gave them. So it's kind of like a perma heal that healed even the deepest scars. So I was like, what's going on here? And then Mob had a hole in his like uniform. They're like, what was that about? That's why I was like, is all this real? They go check out the city, but it seems like everything's okay. They're like, why are there no news helicopters? It's like, well, people are probably so scared because they don't know what's going on. No one wants to take the chance to venture out here with a news helicopter to find out what the hell is going on. So, but now it's like, oh, let's go back home because Mob is completely wiped. He's like, yeah. And I wonder if this is going to be set up for like the future scene. Oh, right. Well, I got to finish the thought I had. Because I forgot the most powerful line between Mob and Shizuki, and that was kind of like what set this all. Well, it was that, you know, right before the explosion, Mob says, you've got to make it through this while he's absorbing the power, because he's like, there's someone, you got to tell them what your feelings are. He's like, just like me, I've got someone, I got to tell them how I feel, Tsubomi. And it's like, I was like, that's actually really beautiful, you know? But either way, you know, which is poetic and perfect considering what did Regan say last episode, like one of Mob's superpowers is him being able to convey to people how he feels, and it's just like just hasn't mustered up the courage to tell that one person how he feels. But either way, um, the thing I was about to say is I'm curious if that's going to carry over into season 3. Was the whole aspect of Mob being like, yeah, lately it seems like the more I use, like, I mean, maybe it's always been this case, but it's like when he uses like his full max power, he does tend to get tired afterwards. But it's happened more and more recently that I'm like, I'm wondering, is that going to be something that carries over into the 3rd season? That like maybe they're going to be after effects of that. Maybe that's kind of a bad sign. I mean, I'm so curious to see if we're going to find out at the end of all of this. Like, will this series end with Mob losing his powers or something like that permanently? Just being the regular, normal middle schooler he's always wanted to be. I mean, that was even something during that fight where like everyone's like, "Oh my god, this is a battle above humans and beyond humans," and Taruki was like, "Nah, he's just a regular. He's a normal middle schooler, you know." Kids at the end, I just thought that was interesting. So, but Taruki offers to carry Mob because they're like, right, where are we going to go? Because Risu is like, yeah, but like our home got burned down, and Sho said like, yo, this guy will help build your house in like 3 days. The guy's like 3 days. So it's like, where do we go? It's like, well, they could go to Regan's place. But I'm like, didn't your place explode? But I'm like, no, that's the office building that caught on fire. His apartment's still around. So I was like, okay. And Teru is like, no, you don't have to worry about me because I've already, like, he's got his place, which I love when he goes back to his place. He's like, oh, I should have went to Regan's. I forgot my place got trashed when Silver Claw came to attack me. So they went to the school to pick up some uniforms, and I love that Musashi was there, and he was like, oh, you gym clothes these, and they explained everything. He's like, oh, okay, cool. And now he's like, you can stay over, was it at my grandmother's house? He was like, and now he turned it into a whole training regimen. It's like, we'll work out hell training for 3 days and 4 nights. And Ritsu's like, no, you don't have to do that. No, really, you don't have to do that. And then Regan's like, oh, that's cool. I'm gonna go back to my place. And Ritsu's like, no. So I love that. Because I love that he was able to just call up the crew, like they're ready at any time. It's because it's like 9 o'clock at night. They show up. Because Musashi went there to pick something up, but like the rest of the Body Improvement Club, which another thing I forgot during partway through the fight, like you have Mob saying Body Improvement fight on him. Like, yeah, you go, Mob. But yeah, we find out in the aftermath the next day that where everything went down, there's a giant plant or something, which we later on find out is broccoli. And it's just like, everyone's like, what is that? Obviously, Tomei believes it to be aliens, and then like obviously Masato believes it's like, oh, it had to be something related to Mob. So everyone's kind of like in awe about all this, and then like I said, we catch up with the Claws, some the former Scars themselves, and they're trying to figure out what they're going to do with their lives. What's his name? Like Kayama. It's like, yo, I'm going to open my own ramen shop, but it's the guy Sakurai was like, nah, don't do that. Like you don't have the personality or whatever for that. Just use your body for good. Sarai's like, yo, I got like a job interview like the day after next, and then like I forgot what the dude who had like the mole in the middle of his head, like he was suggesting a job, but the little girl and the other guy were like, no, you don't. The muscle girl and the small little girl were like, no, you don't have the personality for it. I was like, oh, poor guy. So yeah, very, very interesting. And then finally, what was home dude's name? Was his name Joseph or whatever? The guy that was implanted in Claw to bring the organization down from the inside. He shows up because it turns out that despite everything, hey, not only is Suzuki alive, which I figured he would be. The show isn't like really keen on just like straight up murdering people, but he turned himself in. Got to pay for his crimes, and he talks to Shirazawa. He's like, "Yo, when it's all said and done, don't like you are in a position you got to give yourself more confidence because you're too." Self-conscious, and people will take advantage of that because he's like, I never saw you or anyone else in our group as buddies, but like, yeah, you need to like fix that about yourself because I don't want you to get taken advantage of anymore. And he talks to Sho about the fact is that it's like I forgot what he was. He was basically saying something like, "I wish I had let you see your mom more," or something. He's like, "No, I see mom from time to time, and she always asks about you." He's like, "My biggest regret is I wish I would have been able to resolve this situation before mom had to see what you became." But he's like, "Yeah, but she is." Determined to still check on you, and he's like, you gotta see this through, because at the end of the day, you've got to basically hear an earful from her. And then he thinks back to when Mob extended out his hand last episode, and he extends his hand out too. He's like, people need people, huh? Because like we don't know what's going to happen to Suzuki. They were like, either like normally for his situation he would be executed for it, but it's still kind of like it's still up in the air. So he's probably just going to be in prison. But I doubt this is the last we'll see of Suzuki. You might see him make some maybe smaller appearances next season. But the thing that's some interesting things we found out. It wasn't. It wasn't. Oh God! It wasn't. Claw that burned down Regan's office. Apparently, like a mouse bit a wire and it set off a fire. So, because it was an electrical fire, his insurance was able to cover it. So I'm like, oh, phew. Which is so interesting considering that was his motivation for joining this fight in the beginning, because he thought about like he needed to bring the arsonist to justice so he could get like some insurance coverage on his place. So I thought that was fascinating in the long run. But it also got to make sense because it's like, right, Taruki got attacked at his place. They waited till he was there, and it's like, so you're kind of like, it does seem weird that they would wait until Regan was out of the office. You think they would wait for him in the office? Because even the Claw members were on their way to Mob's house to get him. So it is fascinating in the grand scheme of things. But what really surprised me at the end was, it's like, okay, they got to spruce the place up a little bit. And lo and behold, somebody shows up at the office. And I'll finish that thought first. And it turns out it's Shirazawa, and he wants to work for Regan. Oh, that's the thing, right? Home dude with the mole was like, oh, I want to be like Regan's apprentice. And they were like, no, you don't have the personality for it or whatever. And lo and behold, funny enough, he's the one that ends up becoming kind of pseudo Regan's apprentice, Shirazawa. And they're like, and he's actually kind of like going to be training under Mob. They shaved his facial hair and they buzzed his hair down. And it's like, oh wow, you look completely different now, because he showed up in a suit and everything. So it was kind of his way to kind of pay back for all the trouble that he caused in the long run. This was kind of his way to kind of do that, kind of take his life in a better direction. Once again, everyone's kind of already been headed in that direction. So it's kind of a beautiful conclusion in that, right? But the other thing I forgot to talk about was the fact is the hole in Mob's jacket was the broccoli seeds. The power, like, obviously it was like a burst of energy and life, and obviously it healed up everyone and grew that. It's a giant broccoli in the middle of the city. And I love Regan being like, yeah, we'll just pretend we didn't see that. We'll just pretend we have no idea. But I love that coming full circle. Once again, this little thing from like episode 1 coming back in such a way. It's like, that's such a great touch and just kind of a fun way to end things off. Oh yeah, I also forgot that little bit about the kids with psychic powers and the guy that's doing all this research and stuff. And it was like them trying to figure out what they were going to do going forward. And it was like the girl in the group was like, yeah, she's kind of done with this, because she's like, he can continue his research, but they'd rather not be a part of it, because it's like, they don't want, like, his research could lead to more people becoming espers, but it could also lead to more people, like the Claw situation, of people misusing their powers, and they rather not take advantage of something like that. It's like, we don't need the money, nor any of that really matters to us, so they're all kind of leaving all that behind. But he's kind of like, well, at the very least, I'll stop the research, but hopefully you kids can come by every once in a while, just as friends. So I thought that was kind of a beautiful resolution to that, because I think it's kind of a nice lesson of like letting Claw be like the cautionary tale of what could happen, with power like that, how it can be misused, and you have someone like Mob being the gold standard of not thinking too much of your powers, making you unique and stuff like that. So I just thought that's kind of a beautiful little button on that little side story or element to all of this. So yeah, just kind of a beautiful ending. I'm so curious to see what happens going forward. Obviously, I know that the third season is the final season. I know there's an OVA after this episode, so there's like one more, and so I'm sure it's going to have the intro to it, just like the one in between season 1 and 2 had season 1's intro. Obviously, like season 1's intro is still my favorite, and I like the second one, but I liked it more and more the more times it played. I was like, oh yeah, I really really like it. So I'm kind of bummed to see it go because I like really really like it now. But I'm curious to see what the third opening is going to be. But yeah, it's so interesting because I've not read the manga, but from what I know ahead of time, like the anime is a pretty accurate like a pretty uh accurate adaptation of the manga. Like, I don't think much was really changed, at least on the research I saw ahead of time. But I watched someone say something I thought was interesting. They were basically like, if you want to, season 2 is kind of the okay spot to end, like, not continuing the story, just because apparently the way someone talked about it, and I don't know how true it is, once again, I haven't seen season 3. This was like well before I even started watching the anime. I watched a video of someone saying, like, basically, season 3 is not necessarily filler, but more like it's almost like the way they talked about it was almost like season 3 is an epilogue, where it's just like, yeah, it's just about how everyone's story plays out. So, come about to say, Claw seems to be like the main antagonist. So it's like now that's all been resolved. So it's like now it's just about like closing those stories and see where everyone is type of situation. That's my understanding of it. Maybe I'll have a completely different perspective upon watching season 3, but I don't expect there to be a big bad. To be fair, the show really doesn't have many big bads. Yeah, there are themes and elements and characters and story beats that carry over to later parts of the season, but like it's not to like the last chunk of each season 1 and season 2, where we really, really deep dive into like Claw and stuff like that. The first chunk of the season is just kind of like, episodic adventures. Like you might have 1 or 2 sections that are like 2 episodes, but it's kind of like very episodic in a lot of ways. So I'm curious to see how different that's going to be for season 3, because it probably isn't a major overarching threat, but maybe some of those epilogue stories carry over into like, oh yeah, because there's got to have some conclusion to the mob religion, like the psychic helmet religion, because they were praying, be like, oh my god, this definitely had to be our leader who was involved, just like Masato believes. So yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to see where the third and final season takes us. But like I said, there's an OVA app that takes place after this that I'm going to be watching. But I'm excited to see what that involves, but also to see, like I said, how everything plays out in the final season and how the series wraps up and comes to an end. I'm very, very excited to find out what happens. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.